Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right, in continuation of our series, A Better Human Story by Dr. Andrew Bard Schmookler. We're here today. Who is Dr. Andy Bard Schmookler? He's a prize-winning author, former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah Valley, former talk show host, summa cum laude graduate of Harvard, among many other great distinctions. My dear brother, Dr. Andy Schmookler, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing rather well. I'm excited.
Well, great to have you here. You know, today I want to touch on a topic that you write a lot about, and it includes within its context capitalism. So why don't you tell me about that thing that you wrote about recently?
Yeah, the name of the piece is "Who Kills for Money," and what we see is that every industry that finds itself in the position that they discover that what's making them rich is also killing people. We've had several industries that have had to confront that. Every time that industry has made the choice to hide the truth and to try to fool the people. And who kills for money? Well, we know the tobacco industry did. And I have a friend actually from the fifth grade. It's furthest back any of my lifelong friendships go. He's the world's authority on what the asbestos companies knew and when they knew it, about how they were killing their own workers. And he's made a good living going around the country. Yeah, he knows. I've talked to him about this. I said, has there ever been an industry that made the choice to do what was ethically required as opposed to putting their profit first, even if that meant killing people? And he said he knew of no example. And so we got the tobacco industry and the asbestos industry. And now the biggest crime of all, we've got the fossil fuel industry. We now know that back in the mid to late 70s, Exxon and such had scientists that actually, it turns out, were very accurate in predicting the climate catastrophe or whatever, it's a crisis that was to come, given the way their products were changing the Earth's atmosphere. And so this was an industry that made the choice to endanger the human future in a profound way. The greatest challenge, all because this industry chose to hide the truth and to put out 30 years of propaganda to deceive enough of the people that America could do almost nothing about climate change for a whole generation.
Now, let me back you up into your first statement on the tobacco company. Because you said the tobacco industry, as the nation knows well, conducted a propaganda campaign for decades to obscure the lethal effects of smoking. They calculated that by sowing false doubts about established facts, they could persuade many of their customers who otherwise would have given up the habit to continue buying their products, and industry choosing to kill for money. But my question to you is as follows. The definition of, first of all, capitalism is purportedly the efficient allocation of resources, and somehow that does it in using the supply and demand method with free markets. Right. All that mumbo jumbo is how they like to define capitalism, and they try to equate it with democracy. Which, if anyone with thinking person would understand that China is also a capitalist country. But let me get to the question. Yeah. China is also a capitalist country, and as such, it proves that capitalism has nothing to do with democracy. That said, the former god of capitalism, Milton Friedman, the economist, once said that the corporations, the executives within a corporation's sole fiduciary responsibility is to the shareholders and also their bonuses, of course. So didn't they really do the right thing based on the capitalist structure that they needed to do whatever it was necessary to maintain people smoking? Otherwise, that you're producing a product that has no beneficial aspects to it means that the industry is dead.
Let me cut in because you're giving me so many things to think about, and my old brain can't hold too many.
Your brain is not old, but continue, sir.
Yeah, well, I think it's the same age as I am. But well, so let me introduce it by saying that it's a good kind of conversation to have about the capitalist system because people tend to think that the human world is made up of people simply acting, the whole is just the sum of its parts, and we've talked a little bit about that before. My whole life's work is about, no, there's that dimension, but there's also ways in which the whole has dynamics of its own. And the market system has dynamics of its own. And Adam Smith and Milton Friedman, who put forward that ideology, supply and demand, equilibrium, and, Phillips curves and all that stuff. My dad was an economist. There is a lot of truth to that. I mean, it is a very potentially wonderful tool in terms of, but it has imperfections built into it that result in dynamics that take the human world in a direction that we wouldn't have chosen. And I have a whole book back here from the SUNY Press from 1992 or 3 called The Illusion of Choice, How the Market Economy Shapes Our Destiny. The system has a logic of its own. And, the faultiness of you've got a responsibility if you're running a corporation simply to maximize profits. And I remember when Ronald Reagan said essentially that to explain why we shouldn't regulate. It is an engine for solving certain kinds of problems, but it has its blind spots. It doesn't. When it sets prices, it doesn't say anything about, well, these gallons of gas that you're burning when you go to visit your Uncle Irving are actually participating in creating a crisis that generations hence. It has no idea that value is at stake as we burn fossil fuels from the 19th century till now. It doesn't register what are called externalities. Anyway, that's what I developed a whole book about. The market has blind spots, and the only way we can safely use the market is if we understand what the blind spots are and act collectively to keep the market doing the jobs it does well without enabling it to move our whole society in directions that are bad. Well, what we see with the fossil fuel industry killing to get rich and the others is that we have set up a system that by its own dynamics will create over the course of the generations the destructive thing that we see operating right there. I think it is inevitable that a market system, let's say that, we always had some of it here in the United States, but after the Civil War, it really just took off. It is inevitable that the force of greed will become embodied in the entities that rise to the top in a system that has these rewards and doesn't recognize these costs. The reason I don't believe that if you went around to humankind in general, people like you and me and our neighbors and stuff like that, and said, we've just found out that what you're doing is killing people. I don't think that every one of our neighbors would be like every one of those industries and would make the choice to kill for money. So what we have emerging out of the human world because of the dynamics of the market system and the failure to correct for its blind spots is we've got the increasing amount of power being given to institutions that are useful in some ways, but are morally incapable of exercising the proper decisions when faced with choices like, do we keep killing people and give up our profits? Do we tell people what we know? Or do we deceive people into continuing to consume our products so we can continue to make lots of money, even in the short term, regardless of what that does to our grandchildren?
It's interesting because I think that all the killing that occurs based on our market system is actually required. And when I say required, I mean if you follow the tenets of that ideology, and based on what it takes to maximize profits, etc. I think when we talk about companies becoming monopolies, when we talk about our companies going overseas and destroying overseas the things that they have to destroy so that we can make a dollar, they are following the tenets of the ideology in my belief. And now this series is called A Better Human Story. And one of the questions of becoming a better human story and economic systems and all that's necessary for us to become a better human story is, earlier you've spoken about the gangster. In my opinion, why allow the gangster to win over that person that you just spoke about? My neighbors won't likely choose to kill. That means your neighbor would likely choose to have the tobacco industry die, which is what should happen. Your neighbor would likely choose to have an accelerated joint effort to move to green energy. There are a lot of things that don't fall within the domain that capitalism can't solve, that your neighbor would probably want to do, don't you think?
Well, the market is a useful tool if you correct for its blind spots. That's what I'm saying. Now, when I said something about the gangster, that was in the context of talking about the system that,
yes, it was
the overarching system of civilization, which I say generates a war of all against all. And it is in that context that people like, Trump and the tyrants of the early civilizations, that kind of gangster.
The bankers, yeah.
Yeah. But, so most of my work has been focused at that not economic level, but at the level of the war of all against all. But for a spate of years around the late 80s and early 90s, I focused instead on, and particularly as Eastern Europe was coming out of communism, I wanted to put out the message that this is a great system, but only if you recognize and correct for what it is blind to. So you say something, the inherent tendency of the market, if it isn't corrected for, is to form monopolies and, to have, it's like the parable of the tribes, my theory of the evolution of civilization. You get more and more concentration, and that's what was happening in the 19th century, led to the rise of the progressives and the Sherman antitrust. They understood, this is what happens. We end up with a monopoly that Rockefeller created in the oil industry and that Andrew Carnegie was creating in the steel industry. We got to break up these trusts. And, the Standard Oil case back in the early 20th century. This is correcting for the tendency of the market. So, all the justifications for the market, and they are valid in their way, like supply and demand. They're all predicated on the notion that nobody has power in the market. It's a bunch of wheat farmers and a bunch of wheat buyers, and nobody is able to dictate anything. That's what's required for the thing to conform to what the Economics 101 teaches you that's wonderful.
Let me stop you. I want to interrupt right there because I think that you just hit the nail on the head, Doctor. You hit the nail on the head. It is predicated of there being a whole bunch of farmers and all these people wanting to trade and let the market dictate based on the supply and demand and all of that. But
wonderful things can happen in such a system.
But it has never, and it has to that I think for most Americans that is a naive interpretation of what our market
it's
ever
still
was.
somewhat true. It's still I mean, people respond to price. I mean, a lot. People. The car companies. There may not be a zillion of them like wheat fire, but it is a competitive industry. There is a lot of competition, but there's also when I was a kid, America took antitrust seriously in a way it hasn't for years. And one of the things that the Garland Justice Department was said at the outset that they were trying to bring back the antitrust idea. So I think there's movement in that direction, but we slid a whole lot, and we have a lot of industries with a lot of concentration. And even if there's competition, there are also a lot of shenanigans,
collusion.
Yeah.
I guess we'll have to disagree on that one, because I think it never really worked, and I always thought that there is several masters at the top that pull the strings, and I think go ahead.
I also wanted to say, you were saying you think the killing is necessary.
No. Let me qualify.
But that the system requires
the current system requires the killing.
I don't see it that way. There are a lot of ways in which the market tends to work benignly. It enriches the average family. I mean, all the societies that we look at where people are fairly prosperous and extremely prosperous by historical standards. I mean, if we go back to the 16th, Shakespeare's London or something like that, or Dickens' London for that matter, people's living standards have improved vastly, and our life expectancy has expanded considerably for a whole variety of reasons. So all of them make use of the market. I think the problem is that the system generates entities. They are manned by human beings, but they've chosen those human beings and they socialize those human beings into being channels for the system's greed. It's blind. It's continuous impetus toward how do we make more money, or how do we get more? So it continues to feed certain aspects of consumers. It feeds certain aspects of the entities that are selling things. And that drives our society in directions that we wouldn't have chosen. In addition to killing people, there's also such things as we've got the most powerful entities in our society trying to sell us stuff. They are selling the idea that human fulfillment is to be found through things that can be bought and sold, because those things that cannot be bought and sold don't register in the market. So over the generations, people are going to inevitably, unless something in the cults and the culture corrects for it, they're going to inevitably think that the way to be happy is to be a consumer. That's what the market shaped. So we need to be able to generate human systems. The better human story lies in being able to organize our systems, the market being just one of them, so that what we would choose to become is what we do become. I don't think the Americans of capitalist 19th century would have chosen a lot of the things that the market system has taken us into over the 100 and some years.
I think I beg to differ on that one, but I'd ask you to posit something here and tell me your thoughts on this. Western countries, America, UK, France, and all the major capitalist countries in the world, you made a very strong point, which is very accurate, in that the levels of wealth, the level of the society taking off and doing well, and the power of their economy has been marvelous. As a person from the quote unquote third world, I see things a bit differently. And I see a set of Western countries who take resources out of the rest of the world add value to those resources and sell them back to the rest of the world, which puts the rest of the world in an infinite position of decline. Because again, the wealth based on the current economic system, the wealth of those countries are dependent on those other countries' resources.
I hope you'll forgive me. I mean, I've done this to you before, and I have pangs about doing it. I don't buy that.
I know you don't.
Okay, and it's not a casual don't buy.
Right.
My original Parable of the Tribes had some 200 pages refuting various aspects of Marx.
This is not a Marxian statement. It's just a reality.
Well, that's what the Marxists say. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that I don't buy it. I remember, I mean, I'm a child of the 60s, and I lived in Berkeley. And so I was somewhat marinated in sort of radical left-wing thinking. And I encountered that a lot. And one of the things that I think people who believe that should look at, back then, countries like Taiwan, South Korea, those will do for the moment, were considered third world countries because they were very poor. And it was believed that by the people with a Marxist point of view, and this is an idea which is very central to Marxian thinking, whether you think of it as something you got there or not.
This is something that I came up with on my own, but go ahead.
Okay. I think it has turned out that the capitalist economy relishes third world countries developing into wealth-producing countries. The lefties of my era wouldn't have expected the Taiwanese and the Korean societies and markets being brought up into the first world as they have.
I think that what happened in Taiwan and South Korea is a perfect example, in fact, of what we're saying. Where we need to prop up those particular economies to serve, we do. But let's give a better example. And a better example
I think that what the market would most like is for every country on earth to be well organized for the production of wealth.
But that
includes all the countries in Africa. I think that the difference is that the Asian civilizations had imposed for millennia certain kinds of discipline, for better and for worse. I mean, the Japanese are not a happy people, but they're the first one, non-European power to be able to challenge the European powers. So there's a power that's there. The people talk about Confucianism in the context of the Asian capitalist explosion. I think it is basically cultural, and I don't think that the market system is in any sense glad that some of the countries that are being exploited in some way, like maybe you agree with Nigeria as a place where there's exploitation of various.
No, actually, Nigeria is a great example of capitalism because Nigeria has a capitalist class within Nigeria. When I speak about this, I'm not speaking about it from a cultural standpoint. The Nigerian businessmen are the most effective businessmen on the planet.
Isn't the country as a whole being exploited, like by Shell Oil and by the local capitalists as well? The people are not. I mean, the people of South Korea are able to live lives that are pretty decent.
Yes.
But the people of Nigeria on the whole, tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, I haven't studied this in depth. My feeling is that like Lagos is a place where a lot of human suffering goes on.
Look, Lagos, a lot of suffering happens in Lagos. A lot of suffering happens in Appalachia. here in America. A lot of suffering happens in the ghettos and the barrios in America. We have approximately 80% of Americans who are $400 away from being in trouble. So,
and do you think that serves the market? That I think that I grew up in an America where a great many American families were rising into the middle class.
Yes.
Partly because of unions, and partly because of the GI Bill.
No, it's because of equitable distribution of resources.
Well, but why was it more
equal? I said
why
equitable.
Was it more equitable in the 50s than it had been? Anyway, but I think that the economy. You think that there are a lot of destructive things that are somehow feeding the market.
Absolutely.
I say,
and you do
no,
too.
They're not feeding the market. The market is making them happen, but it is not what the market thrives on. The market thrives on a growing middle class. It doesn't need people to be living lives of desperation and want.
Doctor, you're correct. The markets thrive of having a middle class that can purchase what it produces.
Exactly.
But, however, the reality is the type of purchasing that we have under the current economic model in the United States is unsustainable if the rest of the world also had that purchasing power and that ability to burn, that ability. The wealth of the United States is inconsistent with the potential of the wealth of the entire world.
Yeah, you've restated, and I guess let me articulate. Maybe we can end this little line of conversation. The test to determine which of us is right it could be stated this way: imagine that all the societies in the world and all the segments of the societies in the world were in some basic way prosperous and well-served and provided economically with the potential for a good life. You, I believe, would say that would be so contrary to what our wealth and comfort are built on, that the America of the future would be in worse shape because the rest of the world that's now suffering had been elevated into being in.
I am glad you said that, because that is exactly what I'm not saying, but that is the impression that capitalists would like to say of my statements. Let me tell you what I am saying. Let me tell you what I am. Let me put
I really thought I understood. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is out of my mouth now, not out of what the theory is. The theory is this: if we take the totality of the wealth in America, concentrated at the 0.1%, that doesn't do anything for those people having that money.
It also is bad for the economy.
Exactly. But again, I never said that having a lot of wealth meant you were intelligent. In fact, my show on Tuesday spoke about the people who have the most money in this country too often are the least intelligent. And if they were a bit more intelligent, that money would be dispersed better. But that said, if you look at the totality of wealth in the Western countries and where it's concentrated, not in the middle class of those Western countries, not in the poor of those Western countries, but in 0.1% of the psychopaths who own it. Now think about having that structure over all those who don't have. We would still have skyscrapers, we would still have freeways, we would still have the other things, because that wealth is just stuck saying, I own it. All the land in West Texas that is owned by one family. Imagine if the resources from that land went to all the people. But it's a different model. The cumulative model of capitalism allows those people to do what they're doing right now.
Let me jump in and articulate our difference.
Yes, go ahead.
Otherwise. From my point of view, you are focusing on all the various things that are wrong.
Yes.
In and attributing them to a system that you fundamentally regard as evil.
It is evil, but yes, correct.
Okay. I as a student of history, I cannot see that a better system than the current kind of market that we see in the West.
I can.
Let me just finish. I think that the focus should be on how do we make use of the market using the political sphere to shape it, to correct for its blind spots, to counteract its inherent dynamics that we wouldn't have chosen, not allowing concentration of power in monopolies and stuff like that, not allowing pollution, not making sure that the market price includes what's happening to the environment, counteracting the materialism that the market teaches, all the various, and I don't know exactly how, but making sure that the people running giant corporations are not coming from a state of consciousness such that they would choose to hide the truth of climate change from the world. Look at those dynamics that makes the system destructive and allows evil to work through it. Take what's good about it, correct for what doesn't work about it. That's my approach. Your approach is to have a different system.
Here's interesting.
At least I'm guessing that's what you're.
I think we're right there. I think we just went past each other because I agree with what you just said. Believe it or not, I agreed with what you just said, and that is take the parts of this system that works and change and fix these other parts. At that point, it no longer is capitalism. And at that point, it is no longer capitalism because let me give an example. Under capitalism, businesses are capitalized. They're made in chunk of pieces. And there's a whole lot of people that simply make money from owning stocks on a company that is traded on a stock market that is nothing more than a casino. So we can eliminate a whole lot of the bad parts of what you call capitalism.
You think the stock market's one of the things that shouldn't exist?
Of course not. It should not exist. It's a gambling casino.
Well, Warren Buffett did very well and one of the things he teaches is that's not the way to treat the market. We got human beings who act the way human beings act, but the stock market isn't the problem.
No, let me ask you to ponder one thing because this discussion is going to have to go to another session as well. But I think it's a very healthy discussion from two progressives at that I think needs to be had. But I'd like to posit one thing, and that is to say that most of the people who are reigned in let's say our culture here in the United States, we cannot see that just maybe our current instantiation of the economic system just has problems as opposed to it being a disease that has to be extricated. Some of us simply can't see that we could have been wrong in as much as we developed a lot of riches. Of course, we developed this riches on the back of many indentured servants, slaves, and otherwise. But we cannot see that that our system itself, the genesis of our system, has a problem and keep holding on to it as opposed to say, why not do it right?
You seem to, you see the system as consisting of its problems more than I do. If we were to rank all the civilized societies now and going back centuries and rank them according to what are the most decent and whatever criteria we've got, which includes material well-being and health, but it includes other things about how humans find their fulfillment. So You would find that at the top of the list would be a whole lot of societies that are basically market societies. It would include Denmark, and it would include Switzerland, and and it would include the United States, it would include Australia. Anyway, I don't know what the rankings would be, but I think, compared to what else I know about history, all these market societies are among the very best. And the debate between what all of those societies have come to is the idea of what's called the mixed economy. America has, for various reasons, has had way too much power in the on the side of the corporate system compared to other Western democracies. We could go into why that's the case, but in any event, we also have a mixed economy, and there was a struggle to create that. It was a struggle to have the EPA formed. It was a struggle to have union rights guaranteed by the government. All kinds of things have been a struggle, but we have a mixed economy. And my father was a Keynesian economist. And when I was a kid, they were still fighting the battle between the capitalist political party that basically said, stay out of the market. And people like my father and his colleagues who said, in an economic downturn, what's required is for the government to step up and to fulfill the lack of demand that the private sector can't do, because that's the nature of the business cycle. So we've built a mixed economy, but ours is probably more skewed toward the giving the destructive market too much power than we'd find in Western European countries. But what I'm saying we need to do is to build the best possible mixed economy. Market system for playing a whole lot of role of processing the information of what it costs to produce and how much utility people get from, that's a supply and demand thing. Feeding in huge amounts of information and coming out with something that leads to results that move things in a, partly good and partly not good direction. So creating the mixed economy that maximizes how much good the system can do and minimizes how much destruction it can do. That's what I think is how we should conceptualize the nature of the challenge with respect to capitalism.
Dr. Andy Bard Schmookler, we will continue this discussion on capitalism, which there's much more to cover with respect to the histories of the world, where capitalism actually fell into the world, and whether capitalism and all the market countries are the ones who had always done the best, forgetting, of course, that history didn't just start 500 years ago. Dr. Andy Schmookler, thank you so kindly for having been a part of Politics Done Right.
Yeah, and we agree that one of the things the market system does is it puts a certain kind of gangster mentality into power.
Thank you so kindly, my friend.
But it doesn't have to if we make our economy more subject to our collective decisions.
Andy Schmookler, great guy.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.